As a music teacher, I listen to a lot of what I would call unprofessional songs. Incomplete, abandoned, amateurish, rushed, or just unaware pieces of music that the creator wants to either improve upon or learn from for the future. I started reviewing tracks back in 2017 when I was working for the company Upsound, and I have been doing feedback streams on Twitch since about 2019. Along the way, I've noticed myself addressing the same things over and over again. Some aren't really problems, like the tendency for dance music producers, especially in the trance genre, to use this particular effect sample, while others are things that I feel are genuine problems, either for the song or artist in question, or just as general advice when sound designing, songwriting, producing, mixing, mastering, etc. So in no particular order, this video is going to cover 10 of the most common things that I've seen and my advice as far as how to get over them.
1. No reference, no context.
This is probably the biggest flaw I come across, and I've noticed two main reasons as to why producers and artists, especially the novices, are so hesitant to reference other tracks. It can be intimidating to listen to your own music in direct comparison to what you might consider a professional piece of music. You don't want to get discouraged by how bad you feel like your song sounds, and you likely have a little bit of trouble figuring out exactly why you think your song sounds bad and why you think their song sounds good. Another reason may be that you want to discover your own sound, or you don't want to sound like a carbon copy of some other artist, and you don't want to imitate what you hear on the radio, or some other variation on the desire to sound original and be recognizable as an individual. These reasons are well-meaning, but frankly counterproductive. First, let's talk about the intimidation. A critical ear is an essential part of your skill set as a music producer, and the best way to train that skill is by taking an analytical lens to the music that you think sounds great, and the music that you think sounds awful. The only guaranteed way to make your music sound as good as your inspirations is to keep comparing your music to theirs until you think it sounds as good. It's not even about listening to your song and then listening to theirs and thinking, oh, well, that's great, or, oh, well, mine sucks. You need to be more quantitative, less qualitative. You could try playing a game of spot the difference. Are their drums louder or quieter than yours? Is there more stereo width in their song than yours, or less? Are there more notes in their song than yours, or do the notes happen more or less often than yours? There is no such thing as an exhaustive list of questions you can ask for this sort of comparison, so try to come up with more of your own. If you can remove yourself from the emotion of that comparison and look at these reference tracks more as fact sheets, you'll quickly start to notice what you should be doing in your own tracks to get them sounding as good as your references. On the subject of originality, I can really empathize with that desire, but I do think it's misguided. All music, yours included, does not exist in a vacuum. If nothing else, music is about context, and originality only exists in contrast to whatever else is going on at that time. If you truly wanted to be original, that's even more reason to reference. How would you know if you're not just retreading well-worn ground without surveying the landscape? Additionally, there's a compelling argument to make that your musical taste is nothing more than the sum of your influences. All the music your parents played for you growing up, the music your friends played for you, the music that you discovered on your own, all the songs that you like and dislike push you in a direction that only you can fully appreciate. So why not use that to your advantage? Study your idols, and then study your idols' idols. Identify what decisions you think sound good and bad, and lean into or away from them respectively. The other side of that referencing coin is the context I was talking about earlier. A lot of the songs that I have been sent are aimless, for lack of a better word. The person decided that they were going to just open their DAW one day and try to nebulously write a song. Now, you can get good ideas this way, but typically only if you're staring within a very narrow frame of genre, or if you're lucky enough to nail that flow state that we all want to get into with our music. Unfortunately, it's more likely that you end up with something that lacks any solid sense of direction. You don't have to reference to get around this, but it really does help.
2. No mono check, no separation.
Now, does every song need to be perfectly mono compatible? No. But by listening to your song in mono, the flaws will start to jump out at you, and the better picture you will have of what people listening on their phones or with Bluetooth speakers will hear when they listen to your song. Oftentimes, the mix will change dramatically when you change between the mono and stereo versions. So, let's say a sound has more side signal. It will suddenly become quieter and fall back into the mix behind other elements. Or something might have a chorus effect on it that causes it to phase cancel itself, and that might even go all the way to near silence. Having no separation between your mid and your side signal can really compound this effect and impact the clarity of your mix, leading to this negative feedback loop of adding more width to sounds than they actually need and getting further and further into that pit of cloudiness. Using careful panning placement, using double tracking in addition to or instead of chorus effects, and using mid-side EQ can all help create a sense of space within the stereo field.
3. No variation, automation, or transition.
This is most common in dance music producers, but anyone can really fall for this trap. You get a really good idea and you don't know where to go with it, so you keep repeating it over and over again until even you get sick of it. Or maybe you have a couple of good loops, but you can't really seem to get them to become a full idea. This is where variations, automations, and transition become an indispensable concept to master. Variation, well, that's pretty simple. If you have a 1-bar drum loop, when you duplicate it, make some sort of change. All of a sudden, you have a 2-bar loop. You duplicate that, make a change, now you have 4 bars of music to work with. You duplicate that, you make one final change, and now you have 8 bars. You can add a new hit, you can move an existing hit, or you can remove a hit entirely. You could add a new sound to layer on top of your existing loop. You could swap out an existing sound with a new sound, or you could remove a sound entirely. Automation is a little bit more of a nuanced topic, but no less important. Plus, it also tends to change over 1, 2, 4, or 8-bar sections. A 1-bar automation might be something like changing the panning on a sound to go from right to left and back again. A 2-bar automation might be something like a cymbal that slowly pitches down over a few semitones. A 4-bar automation might be something like a reverb that you automate the volume up on to add swells to a section, and an 8-bar automation might be a filter that slowly opens up or closes down to introduce a new sound or remove an existing sound. Automation can provide a ton of control over the energy levels both within and between sections, so pay attention to what parameters you automate and when. Transitions are one of the quickest ways to get out of loopitis and give your song structure. Variations and automations are tools that you can use to really emphasize your transitions, which is why I'm lumping all 3 of them together. In addition, fills and effects are instant make-a-transition tools that you can use as liberally or as sparingly as needed. At the bare minimum, here's a trick that I use to help come up with transitions. So let's say you're working with an 8-bar section structure. After writing your 8-bar idea, mute everything on the 8th bar. See if it feels natural to have that much silence leading back into the start of the loop, or if you already have it, the start of the next section. Then, slowly start reintroducing elements one by one until you have a good idea of exactly how much you need to make the transition feel natural. Repeat this every 8 bars and use the ideas that you come up with in later sections to help blur the lines between the end of section A and the beginning of section B.
4. Smiley face spectrums.
The most common culprit of this problem is a poor mixing environment, or an inattentive or inexperienced producer continuing to work on music past the point where their ears have become fatigued. If your headphones or speakers can't really put out a ton of low end, or if your ears have gotten too saturated with high end, your track will start to end up with oppressive amounts of those extreme ends of the frequency spectrum. Our ears work best in the range of the human voice, somewhere roughly between the ranges of 100 Hz and 10 kHz. So consumer-grade speakers and headphones will prioritize this range at the expense of the others. This is another place where referencing is an essential tool. Find a song that has a mix that you think sounds good, and try to identify how much volume there actually is under 100 Hz or above 10 kHz. Make sure your song doesn't go too far above those levels.
5. Chords are not melodies.
This is something that I notice a lot more in instrumental music than in vocal music for some obvious reasons, and this applies to both chords as blocks of music notes and arpeggios. I'm looking at you, future bass producers. Even something as simple as a separate instrument playing a melodic line that follows the rhythm of the chords identically but plays its own distinct set of notes can dramatically improve the quality of your music.
6. Sound design is more than synthesis, and it's not mixing.
In metal, the tone of a guitar is given a lot of priority, combining the right pedals, amps, cabinets, and EQs to sculpt a sound that makes the notes shine. In electronic music, the guitar's analog is the synthesizer, and the tone is still important. Too often I hear sounds that are minimally or completely unprocessed, and to me it sounds timid or unconfident. Using EQs, compressors, and other sound manipulators isn't just for the mixing phase, and mixing your sounds doesn't actually mean making a dry and boring sound interesting. As I interpret it, mixing is all about making the sounds in your project sound good together, creating a mix of the best from each sound. Creative mixing, or just broadly speaking sound design, is where you make each sound the best it can possibly be. This is where experimentation and exploration is your best friend. You can get away with huge boosts in EQ, aggressive compression or gating, 5 different phasers or 3 different filters or 10 different distortions. Take the clean starting sound and make it feel as interesting as you possibly can. Then in the mixing stage, remove everything that you don't need so that it can work with everything else in your mix.
7. The difference between a vibe and an unclean mix.
A long time ago, I watched a conversation on YouTube between Matthew Deere and Carl Craig that strongly informed how I view mixdowns. And while I generally get where they're coming from, I often see people trying to make arguments that sound similar in defense of their own mixes. But in those cases, I don't really buy it. The way I see it, there are 2 styles of mixing, what I'll call the old school and new school methods. The old school mixing style is much more about creating a vibe, where the frequency spectrum blends all the sounds and sort of glues them together, creating this gelled sensation. The new school style is much more about precision, every sound isolated, placed within its own space, identifiable and unique. I don't really think one style is better than the other, but I do know what they're both not: a dirty, muddy, or cluttered mixdown. There's still effort put into the roughness of the old school method. EQs are still being used to clean up the sounds, but you're much more likely to see a low or high shelf EQ pulling down the unneeded areas rather than a hard cut with a higher low pass filter. Sounds are generally panned more than they're stereo widened, but there's still place where they could have the best contribution to the mixdown. Wanting your song to sound lo-fi or vibey doesn't really mean you get to ignore the mix, it just means you change how you approach it.
Number 8. Don't bury the lead, or in this case, the lead.
This is actually most common in vocal-centric music, but it can happen to anyone. The 2 biggest reasons I see the lead element in a song buried in the mix are either a lack of confidence in the quality of the performance, because a timid singer will often hide their vocals behind the instrumental, or an overfamiliarity with the lead element. If you're not writing ambient music, and often even if you are, there's almost always going to be some musical element that carries the song, even if what that element is changes from section to section. When mixing your song, that element should be the most clear and identifiable, front and center in the mix, and likely the loudest or one of the loudest elements in that section.
Number 9. -14 LUFS is not -14 dB.
Now, speaking of loudness, this problem here is really about a misunderstanding in the relationship between volume and loudness. I've been given tracks before that never go over -14 dB, with a complaint by the person asking for feedback that their song sounds weaker or quieter than the other songs that they listened to, even though they were trying to match Spotify's loudness normalization algorithms. Now, loudness is a factor of a song's sustained volume levels. Every song is going to have its peak volume levels sitting somewhere at or just under 0 dB. When looking at loudness, we're really talking about what used to be calculated with stuff like VU and RMS, but is now generally calculated with LUFS, loudness units full scale. I know that the loudness war is supposed to be over, but that doesn't mean you want to handle your song's mastering with kid's gloves. Yes, Spotify normalizes their catalog to -14 LUFS. Specifically, they measure that using integrated LUFS, the average loudness over your entire song or album or EP for any collection of tracks you might be submitting. So if your song occasionally jumps up to -10 or even -5, that doesn't mean your whole track is going to get turned down to compensate. Not to mention that loudness normalization is an optional feature that isn't available on every device. Instead of trying to match your song to Spotify standards, you should match it to the other songs that your listeners will most likely be listening to. If they're all at an integrated loudness of about -8, you're going to end up in a situation where the listeners have to quickly turn down their volume for your song. Everything else on the playlist that they're listening to will have been turned down by Spotify's normalization, and they'll likely have turned up their system's volume to get those songs to be as loud as they want them. Now, if they have the normalization disabled, the inverse is going to be true. Your song is now going to be quieter than the other tracks.
10. It's all about the volume faders.
This one is hopefully self-explanatory. The vast majority of what makes your song's mixdown work is a function of both the headroom and the balance of all the individual tracks. No amount of EQ or compression will salvage an unbalanced mix. The easiest solution here is something that I like to refer to as faders down mixing. Instead of starting with all your faders up at 0 dB and pulling things down to get them to fit within the space your track has to offer, start with everything at silence and bring them up to coexist. The exact level you mix to is somewhat arbitrary. I like to work with my loudest element peaking somewhere between -6 and -12 dB, but that's just because it's an easy visual range to find within my DAW. If you want to peak at 0 dB, go right ahead. You can always turn things down either on an individual track basis or on your master if things start to go over 0 dB on the master. Now, some VSTs are designed to work best with a certain input dB that's generally in that safer range, but beyond that, anything is really just preference. From there, it's just a matter of comparing your song to your references, spot the difference will come in handy here, and seeing how the changes of a few decibels will affect the overall sensation of the mix. Don't be afraid to print a few alternate versions of your mix when you're done with the mix down. It's not uncommon to have the standard mix, a mix with the vocals up 1 decibel, or a mix with the vocals down 1 decibel. The more listening environments you compare those 3 versions on, the better you get a sense of how these small changes in decibel values will change the perception of the entire mix. So now I'd like to hear from you. Are there any tips that you have for people who are submitting songs for feedback? Anything that you've noticed in people who have asked you to listen to their songs for help? Or anything that you've noticed when you've asked others for assistance? If you found this information valuable, please give this video a like, leave a comment, try subscribing to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this. I promise I will be putting out more YouTube content this year. If you're interested, check out my Discord server. I will be trying to make that more active this year as well. But really, that's all I got for you today. Here were 10 tips that I've noticed from my 5 years of working on feedback for music, and I really hope it helps you. Thanks so much, and have a great day.